So we're so blessed and grateful for all the new trainings. It's been a real treat to start off the new year. I really think it takes a village to support an artist, and clearly that's what we see here. So welcome, and let's enjoy the show. Yeah, lights. 1 second.
While she stepped out, that person is Sam Talbot Kelly, and she made this whole show happen. She found me, or found my work, and Sam's great. Her board here at the gallery is supporting her to sort of create some new energy in the valley, and it's been a pleasure working with them. I just wanted to point that out. So we're going to start, Sam?
Yep.
All right, so what's the big idea? I came out of Michigan to come back east to school. I'm pretty nervous about leaving the sort of security of the Midwest. And I had quite a good academic record. I got to college, and the first grade that I got was in history with Dudley Ballman, and it was a 2 or 3 page paper, which I wrote and handed in, and when I got it back, I got a D-. Now, I had never really had anything below an A before, so I figured I made a big mistake leaving Michigan. And I did go to see him, and he sat down and he said, "Mr. Anderson, you know the material, you know the dates, you've memorized all this stuff, but there's no big idea." And that is probably the best piece of advice that I've ever gotten. And I have used that in my art and architecture throughout my career. And you'll see that the show here and what I'll say tonight has a lot to do with the importance of the big idea, the concept. And one of the things about concept is that it can be anything. It can be a metaphor, it can be fantastical, it can be impossible. But when you start your process with a big idea that has no rational boundaries to it, by the end of what you're doing, you may end up with something a little bit new. If you start your work, whatever it is, your art, with the status quo, by the time you get to the end, it'll be a little less than the status quo, no forward movement. So I sort of believe in that, and you'll see, I've tried to, my clients, both my art and particularly architecture clients, I've tried to get from them their big idea and to work with that and to free them up to sort of be able to even sort of think that way. So that's part and parcel. Now, the work, one more thing, the work that's on the walls in here is like a mini retrospective of projects I've done in the last 12 years. And this is the first time I've shown publicly in the Valley. So that's another thing I have to thank Mad River Valley Arts for. But tonight I want to talk about my work as an architect and my work in art as I was an architect, and how the art influenced architecture and vice versa. And gradually I was able to integrate my artwork into architecture until I got to a point where I retired out of architecture and now have been doing art full-time for the last 10 or 12 years. In 1972, I arrived in Vermont by accident, and I had been in Philadelphia, where I actually spent a year working for Robert Venturi, an architect who is super heavy on concept. And I also worked for an inner city gang, a shoot-up gang that kind of went good, and did a lot of work in the West Philly, which was very lively, very powerful, very emotional. So I had those two things. Arrive in Burlington, and I look around and I say, boy, what a backwater town with all these opportunities, and what the heck are they missing? You know, the waterfront was undeveloped, and I just felt like I had the energy to sort of create some ideas in the city. So this billboard, probably the last billboard in Vermont before they were outlawed, is a stand. It was painted white, and it was up above where Ben and Jerry's were scooping their ice cream in the very beginning. And this was the first day, and then I went to this, and then one more. So that was my energy to sort of talk about communal ideas and possibilities, and maybe using some of my artistic skills, but getting right into the community. So I was like 30 years old here at this point. The other thing I did early in my career was the Burlington Fantasy Show, or Fantasy and Planning Show, in 1976. Probably none of you are old enough to remember that, but I had this idea that I wanted to do some fantasies of the future of Burlington and just really dream about what it might be, you know, with no sort of ironclad rules or anything. And I got a Council on the Arts grant, and then I realized that, wait a second, maybe I should be trying to find out what everybody else's fantasy is. And so I added that to the program and got more money from the Council on the Humanities. And the centerpiece of this show, which took a year to do, were these peep shows. There were 22, and each peep show was a certain kind of vision about Burlington's future. And I had put out 3,500 questionnaires and did a lot of activities with different kinds of age groups. And all that information, wherever something was mentioned, I would put it into a specific peep show. So if we go to the next one, if you look inside, this is looking inside Rooftop City, and you can see photographs that are part of the real Burlington. And I had a list of names next to the peep show of all of the people who had said something about rooftops, whether it was solar heating or bridges across the street or whatever. So these are fantasy visions that had names attached to them by people that might have been a housewife, a Rotary Club person, a professor, or whatever. And the other thing I want to say is that each time I would work with a group, and I worked with preschoolers through grade school, through high school. Mags Conant's here, she remembers this, through college kids to businessmen to professionals, elderly. When you ask the question, what's your fantasy for Burlington, you have to be very careful about how you articulate that. You might think about a little fling with your secretary, or it might be something else. So, for example, with preschoolers, I made these little stickers that said, I like this, I don't like this, tear this down, etc. And the kids would go around and they'd stick them on things, and I would record that. This is Kids Town, and they liked junk. They wanted, you know, earth hills coming off buildings and slides off other buildings, and so on and so forth. So I learned how to ask these questions and talk to people of a wide variety of human beings around this issue of fantasy and what it means. There was a big show at the end. I choreographed dance pieces, I had music made, I had books, postcards written from the future, and one of the concepts was water in Burlington. And this group of dancers that I worked with, I came up with this costume, and they sort of marched up through the city. People dressed as buildings came from another direction, from nature another direction, and they all sort of gathered in City Hall. And you can see the next to open, there's the actual costume, and the people as buildings in the background. So this was a big deal, and the mayor of Burlington then was an old Dem from an old family, and he didn't know what to do with this work. But a couple of years later, Bernie came on the scene as mayor, and had he been there at this time, I think he would have really run with this thing of empowering people and the idea of not being scared of big visions, etc. The other thing I was doing at this time, and this is now in the 90s, I became interested in bringing a consciousness to buildings and structures that were at risk. The North Shore of Burlington was littered with oil tanks, and they were in the process of tearing them all down. And I thought, gee, you know, save one oil tank, because how many big round cylinders, would be sort of a valuable thing to sort of have. And the idea was to put these endangered structures into a context where you would have to look at them in a wholly new way. So this was one I did for the oil tanks. The Moran plant, which is obviously now finally kind of turned into something. Even back in the early days, you know, it was a big issue. And so I thought, well, this thing that looks like a Mayan temple is so big and takes up so much space. The thing to do would be to run landscape up and over and down the other side, and somehow not tear it down, but preserve it, but let the landscape go over the thing. The Pease Grain Tower, which was the Pease Grain was on the waterfront in Burlington as a viable sort of granary, and gradually it was pretty much torn down. There were fires, and the tower remained. And I thought, you know, every urban plaza should have a tower, a vertical thing. That's basic urban planning. And so save the Pease Grain Tower, paint it or do something to it, and let it become a memory of the historic waterfront. And I think the idea here was kind of based on Mayan or ruins. If one Pease Grain Tower is scary, how would 20 be, for example? And they're on their podiums and stuff. And again, the idea was not to actually say, hey, we're going to build this, but to sort of say, imagine this, and then if you go far out enough, then maybe somebody would say, wait a second, let's paint the tower and save it. You know, it kind of works that way in my methodology. And again, coming back to this sort of notion of the concept is everything, what's the big idea in terms of housing? If you pay attention to, I don't know how much you can see, these are early sketches for a house that was in Lincoln. And one of the things that I do with my clients of all kinds is to try to dig deeper into what their concept is, what their thing is. And I'm not as interested in how many bedrooms, what's your budget, and what the problem with your teenage daughter, but like what really matters to you. Well, it turns out this guy told me that he was interested in philosophy. He was sort of an amateur philosopher. And I said, well, give me one of your favorite books. And he gave me a book called The Banquet or The Symposium by Plato. And in it, Plato, who was definitely idealizing the universe and man's place in it, human's place, said that, you know, a dog can sniff a triangle or lick it and walk away. But as you move up through the animal kingdom, you get to a human, and humans could intuit triangularity in the universe without ever having seen a triangle. And I thought, there's a program for a building. So my idea was, you take 3 buildings, and that start out as square, standard, gable-shaped objects, and break the house down into 3 things, 3 elements, and cut them in certain ways so that if you flew over this, you would look down and see an equilateral triangle as the organizing principle for the house. And if you didn't get it, too bad, but that was the idea. The other thing about this was that there was this sort of place that the owner thought was very, very special, and it had a little road running through it, a road on his own property, not a paved road, but just a dirt road. And he said, that's sacred. So I said, okay, And he said, let's put the house there. But you can't put the house on a sacred space because you lose it. You have to build around it so that you save the space, save the sanctity, and let the road do what it wants to do, which is to go through the house. This is what ended up, that was the largest element. We did do little tricks like a half of a equilateral triangle at a corner, so that as you turned around, you get the complete one. You could pick up some hints, and we let the road go through. And two big things did not happen here, so the concept it failed. And that is, they didn't build the third object, okay? So you lost that. And the buildings ended up being sort of natural wood siding, when if it's a platonic ideal solution, everything would be white. So I lived with that. But that's the thing about the big concept, it's perfect. And if you go far enough out, when you end up, you're going to have something that's still worthy and good, and a little bit ahead of the curve. Okay.
What year is this?
That was '86, and holler out if you want to know dates. So this is a building where the concept was NASA. I called it NASA debris, and the idea was a house that's orbiting the Earth and gradually starts losing its orbital energy, degrades, comes down, crashes into the Earth. And that was the partie for the building. And here it is. It missed its landing point by 90 degrees, came in, made a crater as it dug into the ground, and the building itself was knocked out of square into a parallelogram 12 degrees out of square. The one problem that remained in this is that the interior of this place was pretty static. There were 2 studios in there, one of which was mine, and it was that way for many years. And then next, a couple of young musicians bought the place. And you can see how the house had been skewed out of its rectangularity. And they said, we love the concept, let's renovate the house so that all of the interior shows the impact of that crash back into ground. So these were the floor plans, and if you go next, you can see that's a bedroom, things are crashing through each other, there's a cacophony of materials, and one more. That was an upstairs bathroom, things were crammed around, and finally the concept was fully realized, which was very gratifying to me. One of the projects I did in Burlington was Magic Hat Brewery, and of course the energy of the brewery and the advertising and the branding and stuff was sort of alchemy and kind of mysterious and kind of wizards going around and frogs turning into princesses and stuff like that. So this was an overall shot of the interior, and I was charged with, we did a tour, my idea was a tour through the plant, and I wanted to do something that made going up ramps feel like you were going down, and when you were going down feeling like you were going up. So I had these you can see these lines in the elevations was the concept. And this is the kind of thing that happened for the public. So this is actually a ramp going up, but it's kind of easy to imagine that it's either level or going down. And it's part of this was a tribute to one of my special places in the world called the Mystery Spot. And anybody been to a mystery spot? Yeah, they have them all kind of all over the place where you go in and the place is built on an angle, so things seem askewed. But
in the 90s?
97, yeah. The other part of what I was doing for them was in the retail store, I came up with this concept of the exploding boiler underneath that bursts through the floor with ductwork and electricity and panels and stuff flying all over the place as a clothing rack. And there it is. So this was like wonderful to sort of work on a project where the concept, the driving idea can be kind of this wild and kind of crazy. But, you know, I'm thinking also like an artist as this was happening more and more. Next project is this is actually the old Naval Reserve building, and we did the first new building, which became the Echo, the Leahy Center. So that's all now the Leahy Center. And the first building was the Rubenstein Ecosystem Science Laboratory, which was a laboratory to study the lake and water quality and things like that. And so the university had the money to build this, so they went first, and I had the commission. And the problem was, it was a low budget. They wanted a lab in a box. The box didn't have to have anything to do with the outside world. It was about scientific research. And it was located right on the bike path and the railroad lines and stuff that go down through Burlington's waterfront. So I thought, and I convinced my clients, that this building should be educational on its outside. It should have a narrative. It should speak to the public going by. That there should be information there of some kind that is appreciated, even if you don't know the meaning of the content. The actual application as just plain art or something like that could also be appreciated. So I went through some sketches and got a hold of a guy named Barry Doolin, who was the head of the geology department at UVM. And I said, what can we do on this building that talks about the lake in the most profound way possible? And I learned from him about the Champlain Thrust Fault, which 500 million years ago started somewhere in Montpelier and over 60 miles came into this area and took sedimentary rock that was 8,000 feet below the surface and put it up on top of much younger rock, the youngest rock of all. And that inversion, the Champlain Thrust Fault, is a world-class geological event that Burlington is quite famous for. And so I wanted to tell the story of the Champlain Thrust Fault on the outside of the building. Mm-hmm. And these were early sketches. And so I needed to show the sedimentary layers of rocks and marbles and limestones and quartzites and dolomites and stuff. And I wanted it to be accurate. So I did a search around the country to find bricks that match the color of the different sedimentary rocks, like marble or quartzites or dolomites, etc. And then the bricks became like a pixel in this outside picture. And they, to scale, were represented 500 feet of length and 80 feet of depth. So you could actually count bricks and see how long the thrust was, because the thrust came in at a certain angle, and there it is. And then what's called stratigraphy, which are the layers of sediments, you can measure how deep they are by counting bricks, if you were crazy enough to go through that. And I remember one of the board members, a University of Vermont person, in this process said, "Why are we doing these stripy buildings? It looks like Quebec architecture." And my apologies to anybody here from Quebec, like Lise, but I had to laugh at it anyway. So you can't like convince everybody what you're doing. And there's the plaque that's outside if you wanted to stop. The whole story and the meaning of the geology and the scale of the bricks and everything is out there. Okay, Kelleher Sametz Volk down at the intersection of Battery and Maple Street was an old ice house. They used to mine ice from the lake in the old days and bring them up and pack them in straw here in this building. And it was just such a big concrete hulk that I felt like I could do pretty much whatever I wanted with the outside. And the idea here was, instead of having a lot of windows for individuals, make some really humongous windows, and then people inside the building would have to gather around these windows for light. So it would organize the population of this business around the windows rather than in individual cubicles. But the real thing that I wanted to do here, and I had a wonderful relationship with the clients here, they were fantastic, was I wanted to draw space. I wanted to create three-dimensional space by drawing. Not like fake perspective, but really literally by drawing. I said, why don't we in the interior, I want to draw on the walls in such a way that it is making space. Space is emerging out of lines. I guess that's a really good way to put it. Space is emergent from drawn lines. So this is what happened. I worked with lumber crayon and snap chalk lines and carpenter's pencils, the tools that carpenters use when they're building things. I left all the sheetrock raw and put on watered down acrylic, and then drew lines where all of the studs were so that you could read the entire construction process in the drawings. Next. And next. And next. And this idea extended to the furniture in this place, where I said, I want to draw on the tables, something you're not supposed to do when you're a little kid. And so this conference table, it's just fir plywood, and the drawings, there's some snap chalk lines, some lumber crayon, some colored pencil, are lines that indicate like how the seating arrangement would be, how the structure underneath the table would be. It's almost like layering a lot of architectural drawings, into the surface of the table. And then, of course, the skylights at the airport, the sky gates. This was my proposal. It was a commission, and it was a competition, an RFP set out by the city and the airport commission. And all the artists who wanted to take a crack at this. This is when the airport was doing a major expansion. This was 2004. And we were able to go in and walk around I had nothing to do with the architecture, and look in the architecture and then make a proposal for where art would go. So my thought was, airports are such stressful, busy places with people running around that if you're going to have an interaction of art and a person, it should be in a place where people at least are sitting for a while. They're quiet. Maybe they look around. Maybe they look up. Maybe their plane is late, whatever. So there were 4 big skylights in there that I think were destined to be painted white. And I said, well, let's put artwork in the skylight. And I had 2 thoughts here. One is make the color really intense so that the space below the skylight would have a glow to it, would actually have a rosy glow. And the second thing was that the shape and the color were powerful enough to also create space, to identify this cylindrical space below them. And then the next idea was to cover the skylights with information of a certain kind in a very dense way. And my thought was, in terms of the big picture, the big concept, either these skylights contain information that define all of human history, and we are sending this out through the skylights into space, hopefully to reach other beings in the universe, or there was information coming from the sky through the skylights down into Earth, giving us all of this information about language and science and history. Well, they bought that, and I got the commission. There's Big Red today. They've just done another renovation, and that's what it looks like. So to do the skylights that were about 16 feet off the floor, we had to use electric lifts. up and down, up and down. And I had templates in cardboard and I was drawing. And these are vast spaces. And I had 2 assistants, one of which crumped out. So basically 1 assistant. And we did all 5 skylights in 5 weeks. And I had a bad back at the time. So when I went up in the lift, I had a little stool and I could sit down for a second while I was bending over. And I don't want any sympathy because you know what Michelangelo did with the 16 ceiling, you know, he didn't have lifts. But I'd go up and I'd put a line on and then I'd have to come down on the lift and look up and see if it worked, you know, visually from the ground plane. So Big Red was all about languages from around the world and other notational systems like music and binary code and so on and so forth, kind of all jammed up in there. And as people came by when I was doing the skylights, I might know somebody, and I remember the head of Vermont Public Radio came by and he said, "What are you doing up there, John?" And I said, "Well, these are notational systems and there's music." And he said, "Well, what about Beethoven's Fifth?" And so he gave me the notational system for the beginning, da 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 da, and that was put up there. Big Green was art icons from the last, actually 17,000 years, because I went back as far as the Lascaux Caves and up through modern, Kenneth Noland and stuff like that. Big Yellow was scientific equations and formulae from the last 200 years, sort of since the scientific revolution. Big Blue, which was the biggest of the 4, is a takeoff on Tiepolo, who was a Rococo master ceiling painter, and he would do cherubs and chariots and stuff and clouds. And this was a takeoff on that. And there are things in here, if you go to the airport and look up, Armstrong's footprint on the moon is in there. And it's sort of a modern cosmological image. And it also contains a lot of little elements that were in the other 3. We're getting close to the end, guys. So this is the Nutrition and Food Science building at UVM. And it's similar to the Rubenstein Lab because I felt like the building, unlike all the other buildings at UVM, should tell you something about what's inside them. And it just seemed appropriate and necessary that would be done. And I talked to the director or the chair of the Department of Food and Nutritional Sciences, and I said, let me work with the faculty so I can understand the story of food. This is a department that has to do with the story of food. And let's put that into the building, communicates and narrates some of this story about food. They were all about it, and we decided that food has so much to do with place and climate that I would do something related to those concepts in the building, and I'll explain to you how we did it. We did a number of studies, and my idea was that there would be elements embedded in the glass in the facade of the building that would indicate rain, maple leaves, and meadow flowers, and also snow, bare branches, and corn stubble. In other words, the 2 major seasons. And that somehow we would, I think this was the solution we sort of went with here. And so the idea was we would embed images in the glass that would go from opaque to transparent so that people sitting or standing would see through the windows, but where there were desks and structure and stuff, it would become opaque. And we would do this by multiplying images over and over and over again. So this was a drawing that I made of meadow grasses, and I went out and I drew corn stubble and I drew meadow grasses, et cetera, and then I turned those into computer files. And this is bare branches. I'm not a CAD architect, I'm a hand drawing architect, but I had guys in my office who were pretty good. And by taking that initial image and repeating it over and over again, hundreds, thousands of times, you could go from something that's opaque to something that was transparent. And we made these digital images, and there's a company that was out west that could take the digital information, and you have double pane glass on the outside, insulating glass. On the inside of that airspace, they had a machine that would apply a ceramic material that would be the digital image itself. And the ceramic would adhere to the glass, and then they would reassemble the glass together, pump out the air, etc., and put it up. And this is what you see. Not only did that project something outside of the building, but as the light came through, you got these patterns on the wall, so you kind of lived with some of these images. And this kind of cute, I hate the word, picture at night, it just gives you a sense of how the building glows at night and comes through these images. And to me, the main thing was a building with a narrative, a building that speaks, and using art to combine with architecture to make some of these things happen. I've also done a lot of drawing on tables, and this was a great project with a great client. He wanted 2 tables, one that would seat 8 and one that would seat 4, that could be connected. And the other thing he said, I want them to have something to do with the Fibonacci number series and the 3 pillars of Zen. And boy, was I salivating. This is perfect. So the Fibonacci number series it goes 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, etc. You always add the number just in front. And it's found in nature everywhere. It's found in sunflower patterns and so on and so forth. So these drawn, this is graphite, this is black graphite and fir plywood, and the width of the stripes have to do with the progression of the Fibonacci series. And this is what happens when their 2 are joined. So the Fibonacci starts here and goes through the first table, and then it starts through and goes through the second table, and they sort of meet in here. And this, like the scribble drawings here on the wall, these were sort of scribbled in so you could still see up close. Well, you'll see in the next slide. You have this kind of pattern. So to join the tables, this is a very big tongue and groove connection. This thinner tongue slides in, and then these 3 plugs, which are 3 different South American hardwoods, drop in, and when the tongue goes into the slot, the plugs drop in and connect the tables. And what the 3 pillars of Zen are and why the hell this matters, I'm not quite sure. But this is a table that actually is in our own house, and I call it the Euclidean table. Again, it's fir, plywood, and mahogany. And there are 4 families of forms: squares and rectangles and right angles, triangles, acute angles, circles, and ellipses. And then on the sides, the 4 sides of the table is one of the families. Like here would be the square families. So bringing art into the surface on which you're eating, seemed like a great thing to be doing. Next, please. Okay, 8 more slides, and we can have some questions and conversation. In 2010, right after Irene, I left my lovely Jill with the aftermath of the storm, and I headed out on a 7,000-mile road trip. And I decided that what I was going to be looking for in this road trip are lines in the landscape. And that was what I was looking for. So here's a line. It's actually 134 cars of coal that come and go 24/7 out of the largest open pit coal mine in Wyoming, in the country, in Wyoming. And that line inspired this piece called Wyoming. And I also, when I did the artwork, I didn't want any drawn lines. I wanted the lines to be the cut edge of paper so that the actual lines that I'm drawing with are the edges of paper rather than applied by some other medium. And the different strips of paper were painted with the colors that I remember in the meadow, in the prairies that I wish I had been walking across when I came across the coal pit, and then the train cars going out infinitely and to the west and to the east. This is North Dakota, and I was driving along, and there's this wheat field, and on the horizon there was this long line of white dust, and out of that dust came a giant New Holland yellow combine. And so the idea of the dust forming a line at the edge of the universe, and then the wheat that had been cut down, as opposed to where it had been cut from, creating these other patterns, inspired this. And again, since didn't want to be drawing with lines, this is all torn paper, which just painted and then twisted, and the yellow is the New Holland coming out. And my very, very good friends, Jeff and Beth, have this in their living room, so I get to see it once in a while. And these are soybean fields in the fall in northern Minnesota, and I was interested in the lines where two colors meet, where one color meets another color, it creates a line. Actually, there's kind of a little fence or hedge line too, and that's inspired this piece, which again, it's cut strips of paper. This almost drove me to the loony bin, trying to figure out, I was painting both sides of paper, it was cut into strips, and then I was folding it over, and I had to sort of figure out how these things went. When I look at it now, I'm thinking, how did I ever do it? But that's that, and I think there's one more. Yeah, my favorite part of the country, the sandhills of Nebraska, the whole western side of Nebraska, these very soft lines, and the piece that resulted from this. Again, it's the cut edge of the paper that becomes a line, and this was actually 2 painted abstract landscapes of the Sandhills country, one left alone, the other one cut into 2 to 6 inch strips, and then I had a big grid, and I flipped coins as to whether one of these 6 by 6 squares was going to go down or not, and I figured a way to connect them, and this thing got really big, like a great big crossword puzzle, and then I squished it down and glued it onto the map underneath to sort of create this final piece. So that's the end of the slides, and I would love some conversation. I don't want any puffballs. I'd rather have questions that make me feel like I want to lie to give you the answer. So, yes.
Hi. I love the intersection of art and architecture, and for anyone who's built a house or is in the development architecture world, everyone knows like just building anything is oftentimes the big idea, let alone any of the art or the creativity. So can you spend a minute talking about how you brought your clients along and kind of encourage them to think a little bit broader than just a built structure?
Well, like as I mentioned with one of the houses, I would ask people about the music they liked, the books they read. You know, I'd kind of come into it sort of up from left field, just sort of getting to know them, and then probing a little bit more. And then at some point, so this questionnaire, and I would ask them, what do you think is the favorite room of your daughter, or your spouse, or your husband? And gradually these things, and they would fill them out, and then we would have a meeting and talk about them. And I would kind of seize on different things like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, there are architects, and I know one, not in the Valley, who come to fisticuffs with their clients because they're so intent on having their idea built.
I know some of those are.
Yeah, they're out there, definitely.
But you've discovered that if you find ways to draw out what they want, you can capitalize on that with a big idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And also you have to be ready to say, well, it's not working, you know, and sometimes it doesn't work, and
Right.
you just do what you have to do. But by the end of my architecture career, I was getting clients who wanted to come to me for my work, whereas in the beginning I was trying to sell it. And that was great. It lasted about 10 years, sweet spot.
Was there one building or project or design that was the tipping point for that in your career, where from now period on, people came to you because of your crazy ideas instead of ran away from you because of your crazy ideas?
Yeah, I think Magic Hat, and then Killer Sametsfolk, the Red Drawing. I think that at that point, I felt like people
You
were,
had really established yourself
Yeah,
as being someone
yeah.
who was doing these.
somewhere around in there.
Yeah.
I want to say something here also that you know, the Mad River Valley is a fabulous place, of course. It's filled with architects, and it also has this worldwide reputation for the design build movement, and so many people came up here because of that. My van broke down and I ended up in Burlington, and I had most of my architecture career was over there. And I knew what was going on in the Valley, and actually I started teaching at Yestermorrow in 1985. But I took a different track, and I didn't feel really particularly confident about building or being able to build. I ended up building some houses and some projects, but it took a while, and I was kind of shy. And I mean, now I'm here, I live here, and of course, you know, this design build world is a wonderful thing, but I kind of came into Vermont in a different way, you know, with sort of a different agenda, and now I feel pretty integrated with everything. But yeah, yes.
I would like to know how someone who studied at the A&A building designed by Paul Rudolph got to love art, because he sure didn't.
Well, I don't know how many of you know the architecture building at Yale. It had just been finished when I went there. Paul Rudolph. And I remember, he was a funny, short little guy, and I remember him coming into the middle of this, and he looked at me and he says, "This is so fantastic," you know, and it was this horribly brutal building, which I appreciated just because it was new and different. I mean, you could injure yourself by bumping into the wall with the ragged concrete edges and stuff. But yeah, but you know, there were lots of other people around. It was a pretty luscious environment to be in terms of, and boy, oh boy, you better have your big idea together, because that's what they wanted. And I remember guys that would do, you know, at 4 in the morning, they'd do some kind of a quick sketch on yellow tracing paper and just come into the jury the next day and put it up, and the professors would say, "This is it, this is amazing." So dangerous. Yeah, Mark.
I'm curious about the transition to art sort of full-time, because I remember 25 years ago doing a studio visit in your office, and you had just this incredible backlog of work that you had already created. And how do you see things differently now, doing art, you know, all the time, as opposed to doing art sort of on the side, or maybe not on the side, but along with the architecture? What's changed for you?
Yeah. Well, one thing, I don't know if this answers your question directly, but you probably can see from the work that it's drafted, a lot of it. And I work to this day on my horizontal parallel bar drafting with triangles and stuff, and much of the work is done that way. So in a sense, I continued doing what I was doing as an architect, but now it's just for me on paper for nobody else in particular. And I also think that the process of running a studio, even though I had a very creative, open-minded environment, I never had more than 3 or 4 people working. It was a relief to let go of the budgets and the paychecks and the, you know, competing for projects and stuff, and just relax into, you know, drawing, which is like a meditation, and that switch from drawing with purpose to drawing with as a meditative kind of process. Yeah, please.
When you look back over this body of work and what's in the gallery, could you articulate, are there any patterns or themes that you feel have carried through your career, or that you know, when you look back on this, that you've returned to?
Well, one is science. The chance drawings, like that yellow guy right there, are inspired by quantum mechanics, where at the fundamental, well, it's not fundamental, we know that, but at the lowest level of what we can sort of understand right now, you know, things happen by probability, not by determinism. So things, you only know where the probability of electron being in a certain place. So I read a lot of science, I read a lot of science fiction, and those are, I continue to do that. So that's one theme that kind of ran through. And the other thing is when I was growing up, we lived outside of Detroit, and all my grandparents were in Nebraska. It's kind of, I'm a second, third generation Nebraskan. And we took these trips in our Buick, you know, whatever it was. My brother and I in the back seat, hotter than hell, taking 2 days to get from Detroit to Nebraska. There'd be Burma Shave, Brill Cream, Burma Shave ads along the highways.
Yeah.
It was hot, we would fight. And at the time it just seemed like awful. But something got into my soul, and that is where I returned. Jill and I just got back from New Mexico, where I kind of breathed in that amazing, abstract, minimal landscape with infinite sky, and you're very small. And I just love that space, and I think you can see it in the work, and you probably will continue to see it in what I'm doing, want to do. Most people fly over that area and are glad to get to the west or east coast, but I like it in there.
Well, I see some of the patterns flying over, I think, in, you know, those gridded and
Yes.
organic pieces. I mean, there's
Looking
an
down.
influence of looking down.
When I fly, I'm at the window, and my head is like that. I end up with a quirk in my neck, but I have to look at every single piece of landscape, and when the crop circles, you know, kind of emerge, you know, it's all pretty far out.
I think the thing that I'm so impressed with in looking at this body of work is how much of a huge intellect you bring to each of the projects. I mean, really researching the background, you know, the whole point of the project becomes part of the environment and the history, and you talk about Plato, and you bring all of your knowledge and background information into these, which I find so inspiring.
Thank you.
I
Yeah.
don't mean that as a puffball.
Sounds a little puffy. Thank you. Yeah, Beth.
I had forgotten how much your contributions to helping your community in Burlington sort of served as a basis for so much of this work that came out. And I guess I'd ask you to reflect on that because it was such an important part of your early career of giving back and helping to visualize and looking at the lines in the water and how that impacted your art.
Well, like I said, you know, I came to Burlington and it just seemed like a palette of possibilities, you know. And it was a small town. I'd been in, you know, since I left Michigan, college for sure, I'd been in cities. And I learned that I couldn't be the architect my dad wanted me to be, which is doing high-rise buildings in big cities, you know, being famous. And Burlington was a place where I could be myself and kind of do just about whatever I wanted to do. I mean, you know, if you wanted to have fantasies about the waterfront and have a show, you could do it, you know, you could set it up yourself. I think also there was always a sense of sort of giving back to the community. I was on the design review board for a number of years in the city in Burlington, and on the board of AIA, and I use those times as opportunities to do projects because I could, you know, because you could do that. So one thing. Before I came over here 8 years ago, I was living a much more solitary life. I finished my architecture and I was doing art. I was in North Ferrisburg, and you know, then coming over the mountain to date Jill and getting closer and closer. And then of course we had that ceremony where I had to sign a visa saying that I would attend Italian night and everybody's party and do that. So I was surprised at the richness of the social activity here, which I had in Burlington at one point, and then I kind of moved away from that. But I don't know if that quite answers your question, but.
John, what about your future plans, both for you know, making art and doing this kind of you know, outreach that you're doing? You sort of, this amazing energy I can feel around you, you know, and I think there's a lot of people that are going to be looking to you to see, you know, where you go with this. Interesting opportunity for you.
Lots of pressure.
You know, that's an interesting question, Dave. I showed you the slides of the fantasy show in Burlington, and getting people's names and making people feel important. And then suddenly everybody's looking at me and saying, "Okay, John, what do we do next?" And I kind of freaked out. I split. I went down to Bristol and lived a very low, you know, profile life for a while. And I don't know. I mean, I think I would be nervous about looking ahead and thinking that, you know, that I was going to be in that situation again. I do know that I want to draw. I've got to draw. I love to draw. I love the meditation of drawing. I kind of feel like empty right now. Like I'm not quite sure what I want to do next. I was doing a few more landscapes. But after having been in New Mexico and at the White Sands, I'm working on a photography project right now, trying to pull some of that imagery together. I don't know. I don't know right now what's next.
You can lie. You did say you wanted to lie.
Yeah.
These answers.
Yeah. What?
Don't be shy.
You think I'm lying?
Well, I'm waiting for it.
Okay. Well, ask me a question that I'm going to have to lie to, Beaver.
That question.
Yes. All right. I was lying. I want to be the savior of art in the Mad River Valley, and I want to wear robes, togas around town.
What was the most gratifying part of the architectural process for you? Was it all the research and working with the client, Was it, was it all the work that goes into the beginning? Or was it the actual building? Or was it all together?
I think, you know the joke about the napkin drawings architects make? I mean, they're really real. So, like I think the Rose Planetarium or the addition to the came on a napkin sketch. But that for me, that was it. It was listening to people, really listening. You've got to listen to everybody, because I had one bad experience, which I'll just give you a quick.
Bring it out.
Did a house for a psychiatrist and his family who'd just been spent 2 years on a Navajo reservation working with Indian kids with mental issues. And he was like at a point in his life where he was just opening up to everything. And we ended up building an addition that was a hogan out of respect for the Navajo traditional hogan, and I cribbed the ceiling in wood, and I looked at every piece of wood, and I was just like into it, and he was like totally there. And his wife, very quiet nuclear biologist, never said anything. And we went through this whole process. The house got built. There were 2 little boys in the family, and she took the kids and left. And 'cause she said, "This is not my house." And I moved in with a psychiatrist and a psychologist. It was really crazy. But the lesson was listening. I should have been listening to her, and I was so caught up with this guy's childlike enthusiasm for everything that I lost track of that, and I never let that happen again. Right. And anyway, the listening to people, and then the concept sketch, that's the high point, that's the sweet spot, that's the thing I would love, to be able to come in and present that sketch and maybe get some enthusiasm. And then the rest was just making sure. So here's my thing on architects. I considered them.
Watch it.
I know. There are a few in this room. This is going to be good, though. They're keepers of the concept. So you start a project, and nobody is going to care about the concept as much as you do. And there's going to be budgets, there's going to be zoning, there's going to be the electrician who says you can't do this, and the plumber says no, you can't do that. But every single decision, you have to look and say, is this part of the concept? Because you want the concept to go all the way down into the tiniest little thing. And nobody else in the process is going to do that. I don't believe. I've never seen it before. So that's my take on the process. And I don't know, did that?
Yeah. Would you all agree, the architects here? Would you guys agree? Contractor. Is that Paul?
Okay. You know what? I'm getting a sign here.
Okay.
So, thank you all for coming. Yeah.
Are you the only Yale architect?
Who are they clapping for? I'm sorry. I didn't hear the question.
You maybe don't want to ask it. Howard, do it again.
What I was going to say was, are you the only Yale educated architect that's built buildings that
They do not what?
John, the answer to that is no. You're not.
No, they all leak. They all leak. If a building does not leak, it's not a very interesting building.
John, I'm going to sneak up here to say
Yes.
that thank you so much.
Yeah.
This has been the hit show of forever here in the Valley. I mean, it's been wonderful for you all to come out and be here tonight. I want you to know that we need money. We need money to keep this show on the road and have Sam come up with these incredible ideas for shows. We need your help. So please, if you have not made a donation this year, make one now. Thank you.